Hi, everybody. It's Brian Hackett from the Learning Forum, along with Megan Hackett. This is a chance for us to present something that's really interesting work from one of our members and do it across several of our councils. So instead of an initial council meeting with just the members, we offered this up to a couple of our councils. And the reason I think it's so interesting is IBM Consulting has been leading in the virtual first learning strategy well before COVID. And this is just one of the things they're doing that I think is worth everyone learning more about in the simulation space. So with that, I think, why don't we just get right into it? And Andrew, I think we're kicking off with you first.
As Brian said, I'm Andrew Wolf. I lead learning and knowledge sharing for IBM Consulting. IBM Consulting is now IBM's largest business unit, where, I don't know, we're 125, 130,000 people out of IBM's population spread globally. And it's really the services side of IBM, versus the software side or the hardware side that you may think of IBM being. We're going to talk a little bit today about what we're doing with our consulting academy and how we're transforming that to really take advantage of great technologies and to move in a different way with some of our non-technical skills training. Those of you that know me will be able to attest that personalization of learning is really my armband issue and has been for a long, long time, back to the days when I was teaching Spanish to university students, back before we actually used the internet for learning. And now it seems that not only has the rest of the world kind of caught up, but personalization and adaptive learning have started to dominate what the pundits talk about in our space, in the learning space. Well, that and AR. And some of you probably heard us talking about AR as you're coming in on, or VR. But despite our best efforts, it seems like we're still kind of on the left side of the hype curve with adaptive learning. And as we've looked closely about what's really happening in the area of personalization, it still seems that few are really doing it, and especially doing it well. It seems that even fewer are doing it at scale, and that even fewer are trying to do it with non-technical content, although more than used to do it a while ago. For technical content, it does seem that we've been making some progress. And especially if you think about upskilling, reskilling, cross-skilling, I think that's actually helped to accelerate personalization, in part because reskilling is inherently a personalized or a personal matter. But interestingly enough, not so much in the consulting and client engagement skills, or as my team has recently started calling them, the power skills space. And I think we all have our reasons. It's hard to do for non-technical skills. It can be expensive. Many of us will say, well, these skills are inherently social. They should be taught in classrooms, and really believe that. We hear a lot, learners are sick and tired of doing everything virtually. This is kind of their one respite from doing things virtually. And oftentimes it comes down to us as learning professionals. We're not really convinced we want to or can do this well. But yet we know that there's huge variability across all our practitioners' abilities and experience in problem solving or stakeholder management or negotiations, just like there is around configuring ERP solutions. So today, as I said, we're going to tell you a little bit about how we're rethinking how we can help learners develop these skills better and move more efficiently through personalization and adaptive learning, and how we're pushing ourselves as learning professionals past some of our old prejudices along the way. Pre-COVID, our consulting skills training at IBM was largely classroom-based, and it was expensive to run. Too much of our investment was going towards travel and venue costs instead of the actual learning. But more importantly, it was impossible for us to scale. So in any given year, our targets were typically about 30% of our user population that we wanted to get through core consulting skills training. COVID forced us to re-platform very quickly. And when I say quick and I say re-platform in the same sentence, you'll probably guess correctly that we shifted from classroom to virtual classroom delivery. And we did it fast. It was very effective. We didn't miss a beat. And generally speaking, learners thought we did a decent job. At the same time, we realized as a team that virtualizing this curriculum had really opened a door for even more change. And so we decided to exploit this opportunity and drive full-scale transformation and build something a lot more impactful based on kind of the 6 design prompts that you see on the screen here. So we wanted to dramatically increase participation in this curriculum from a couple thousand a year to a whole lot. And Kelly's going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We wanted to make that content more just in time, just enough, just for me. So personalization. We wanted to shift away from what we want learners to know and toward what we wanted them to do differently, and to drive towards demonstrated mastery of the content versus just completion. As part of that, we want to make sure that they got personalized feedback, which obviously we do some in the classroom. We do it with breakout groups and with videos and whatever. But we thought there's a great opportunity here virtually to give better feedback and more personalized. And finally, we wanted to create some room to introduce our some higher end, higher touch content that will hopefully entice some of our more senior folks into participating as learners in this curriculum instead of just sponsors or instructors. We've clearly partnered with ETU to enable this huge part of this transformation. In fact, Austin and I first connected probably about a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer even. And ever since, I've always been looking for an opportunity to work together on a project. And this transformation was really a perfect candidate. So Kelly, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to talk a little bit about one of the big points that we're trying to accomplish here.
So as Andrew was saying, as you know, obviously everyone's had to shift during the pandemic. This program was previously very much a face-to-face program, blended learning with a significant part of it face-to-face. And of course that had to shift during the pandemic. And as we virtualized all of our face-to-face training, we started to think about what the landscape and what the future would be like once things got back to normal, let's say. And that led us into thinking about a radical overhaul of the program. And that was also driven by this challenge, let's say, quite a significant challenge to grow our learner participation from what it was, which was 5,000 annual. And you know, the 5,000 annual learners was very much the max that we could reach with the structure of the program that we had. So given that a large portion of it was, incurred that face-to-face element, this was our limit, so to speak. So when we thought, okay, well, we want to get this learning out to more learners, we wanted to have greater impact for the business quickly, how can we do that? And so this was the challenge, to massively improve our yield without multiplying the cost along the same lines. So growing from 5,000, and in this first year, what we're looking at is 15,000. I'd hope we can get more than that actually, but that's the target we've set. And then growing within 30 months to 100,000. So this is our mission. And whilst the volumes are important, what's equally important, if not more so, is how we get there. And that we do that in a way that's focused on learner engagement and an enhanced ability to apply the skills for business impact. At a high level, you can see some of those, and I know Andrew's already referred to them as power skills. That's what we're now calling them. So you can see some of the power skills that our portfolio addresses. And, really, this was the last divide for us, because everything across our consulting portfolio relates to these power skills. And as you know, these type of skills really require a different approach from technical training. And in moving towards the virtual first design, we did question, how can we do this well? These types of skills require a different sort of touch. And Andrew mentioned earlier that, they do require practice and that personal touch. So how could we really do that in a personalized capacity? And the sobering reality of what it takes to develop and hone such skills, we knew it was going to require a higher investment to get it right. And so on the next slide, you can see a high-level overview of the redesign. And you can see here we've mapped this out into 4 tracks. Andrew, would you like to say a little bit about the start of this structure?
Yeah, so you can think of this as a funnel, quite literally, where we use technology and adaptive learning to really achieve scale higher up on the slide. So the top ends of the slide is all about the scaling. And then as you move down, it becomes less about scalability, more about high touch, more about the social elements, until you get to the very bottom. You see, we actually call it over on the right, the super special face-to-face master classes, because that's really what we mean. So track 1 at the top is really self-study, and it's for everyone. We essentially are using diagnostic simulations to direct learners into a body of content, and to a portion of the body of content that's most appropriate for them. So think of it as kind of a test up or test out strategy. And instead of having to consume the entire body of that content for each topic, they only have to do what they really need. Then within that content, we're also introducing developmental sims to make that content more applied and engaging for learners. And we'll show you some examples of that in a while. Track 2 is then still about delivering at scale, but it introduces a virtual group-based practice session or set of sessions facilitated by instructors. Track 3 then uses group interactions and support mechanisms to encourage and share on-the-job application. And then track 4, it's all about extension of the skill set into the mastery realms. And so today, as we go through, we're going to be talking mostly about track 1, the part where we're trying to use simulation-based adaptive learning to scale the most essential part of the content, as Kelly said, from 5,000 learners a year to over 100,000. Kelly, what'd I miss? I mean, Kelly does a much better job of explaining this slide than I do.
Well, it's funny because when we started with the redesign concept, you know, a little while ago now, this was one of our very early slides. It looked perhaps a little less prettier than it looks today, and we sort of said this is going to be, you know, the slide that stays with us, and it is the one slide that has stayed with us to the end. But I think you covered it well there, Andrew. I mean, one other aspect I'd add into it is in going through this design and really thinking about what we would do differently as we roll this out. A key element for us was also thinking about the relationships we had, that our learning program had across the business. And we have, you know, lots of different professions in IBM, consulting, you know, being the one that people would mostly associate our academy with. But of course, we get consultants from right across the professions, the technical architects, solution architects, project managers, etc. So a big part of socializing this new design was linking in with those professions. Each of them, even though they have their technical accreditations or certain certificates that they focus on, they all have part of their learning journey where they ask their learners to go and skill up on communication skills, on building trust, on relationship management, etc. And of course, that's our sweet spot. So a big part of this was building those stronger bridges to the professions and, you know, encouraging them to really promote this program with their learners. In the middle of the design there, you can see we have a business services badge. And this was a badge which is linked, it's a skills badge. So it's, you know, it's not just linked to the program. There are other elements that a learner has to do to get this digital badge. But it was something which was part of our old program, let's say, that we are just phasing out and sunsetting now. And very much we have included in this program as well. But what's different here is that with the old program, this business services badge came at the very end. And here you can see we have it in the middle. So what we're saying here is actually, if you go through track 1 and track 2, you will have, with our design, you should be able to apply those skills just as well as if you had gone through the old program. But what you're now going to get if you progress on to the track 3 and track 4 is an even greater depth of learning. So I think I would just add that to this one.
As we've said several times now, scaling is critical for us, right? And we all know it's a little tougher, but not impossible to do with this content. And honestly, our bigger challenge here is really upgrading that experience for our learners and the actual impact that the training has on our business, despite moving it all from classroom to virtual delivery. And that's a tough sell, especially to the learners. And we all know the tricks that we use to make self-studies more engaging, right? A little bit flashier media, a storyline that helps provide some context and some additional relevance. And of course, we did all that here. And it absolutely helps to improve engagement, at least versus the virtual classroom experience. But to take it to the next level, it really is all about personalization. So instead of simply re-platforming existing content, which is always a temptation, we've made an assumption that kind of the general topics that we were doing before were about right. And then we pulled in practitioners and said, okay, so at this staff level, in this particular area of focus, tell us the mistakes that you see most often. Tell us which ones would improve our performance most if we corrected them. Then we also said, and tell us one or two more things that we could do potentially in this space, in this domain, that would help take us as a business from good to great. And then we use that information as the basis for our redesign and build our decision trees around those elements. The fact then that we employ decision trees in the simulation increases our interactivity and allows learners to then choose their own path for the content. And then we provide personalized feedback and remediation based on those decisions. And by basing practice and feedback on the real world challenges that we sussed out of our user group and the problems that they see in practice every day, we increase the likelihood that learners will both remember and then translate what they learn into practice on the job, hopefully then addressing that 90% of skills atrophy that we see on the right hand of the side, right? That comes from, you know, the just in case or one size fits all approaches to learning that we often engage in. So as we started down this path, we're spending so much time thinking about getting our learners through the top track, the track one. We also realized that we really needed to put some time and some thought into tying all the elements of this together and then tying them together as a group of learners as well, or as a group of professionals as well. And, you know, so the social aspect, and then also how do we help them navigate the complexity of that 4-tier structure more effectively? And Kelly, I think it's back over to you to talk about how we did that.
Aside from the adaptive learning, which of course is extremely exciting, this is one of the slides that excites me the most. Because, you know, what you can see here is the landing page that our learners see when they enter the digital campus. And the digital campus is effectively our one-stop shop, so to speak, for all our learners to come together to one virtual learning hub. And this is a huge jump from where we were before. We didn't have any of this. Our learners, you know, with their blended learning program, did that pretty siloed. They joined the platform that they were in. They stayed in their cohort, in their geography, in their capability area, and there was no mixing. So conceptually, this is such a big shift for us to move everyone into this one place, this one, and Andrew mentioned earlier there, you know, about the social learning. So bringing folk together into this digital campus is really what we're trying to achieve with that. And this wrapper is really the foundation, I would say, and a critical part of our design concept as we started to move towards the virtual first design. You know, when it comes to an online learning environment, and this was very much something that framed this for us, we know that interaction is enhanced when social presence and a shared learning space that can instill a sense of belongingness to the learner community is perceived by the learner. So when we designed this campus, we wanted it to provide an experience that facilitated learner engagement across 3 areas: the learner to content, and of course that's very much where we, you know, our adaptive learning and the other tracks come into play. The learner to learner, social aspect of this, where learners can collaborate, can share, can raise their eminence with each other, etc. And the learner to faculty and support, where they can engage in this space to get support, to get answers to their questions virtually. All of this was really pivotal to our design. Another important consideration here was to involve our learners in the co-creation of this environment. And we did that in a couple of ways. In the early stages of the design, we ran several learner advisory workshops across all of our geographies. And also upon launching the campus, which, by the way, we've launched just about a month now officially, but on launching the campus, we are inviting all learners to take part in an ideathon where they can vote on the ideas that we have presented for the remaining zones. So you can see here in this image, we have 6 zones, and the learning pathway is the zone which is of course opened at the moment. So learners go in there to consume their learning. But these other zones, what we call program extras, if you like, are there to really supplement and add to the experience in this virtual environment. The guidance gateway and the library, we have them coming on soon. So they'll be the next zones to get rolled out. But for the other 3 zones, what we have at the moment named the Watercolor Network, the Leader Channel, and the Exchange, we've actually put these out for vote to the learners. So as part of the ideathon, learners can vote on those ideas and or they can suggest other ideas. So that's we'll let that ideathon run for a while and we'll see what comes out of it with all the learners that contribute to the vote there and the ideas. And if something new comes along, of course, that's what we'll implement. But we really wanted them to tell us what they would like and what would be useful to them and what they would use, importantly. And finally, to add to this this slide, a big part of our learning strategy is to gather intelligent real-time data about our learners. And the mechanics that we've built into the campus is going to allow us to do that through tracking engagement analytics. So that's pretty huge. And of course, the focus on analytics is very big within our learning pathway and what we're doing with the adaptive learning through our partnership with ETU and that self-paced asynchronous element of our program. And this is where Austin and the team stepped in to help us. And Austin, perhaps you're going to take the next slide and talk a little bit about that journey.
Absolutely, Kelly. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I think the first thing, the part of that we looked after with IBM and I've been working with IBM on is track 1. If you go back to that slide that Andrew and Kelly spoke to, that original kind of the overall design, track 1, 2, 3. We're helping IBM with track 1. Adaptive personalization in action delivers just in time, just enough, just for me learning. So how do we do that? The key about the value that we're bringing to the table is around the data. So you've got to have accurate, consistent, verified data in order to deliver on adaptive personalization. And not only do you have to have that accuracy, but you also have to be able to do it, to be able to assign the paths dynamically in real time so that the learner gets this personalized learner journey experience based on how they apply skills in a simulation. And the next slide, we're actually going to show you a real one of IBM's simulations. But before we do that, just to talk a little bit about what was there before and what's there now with ETU. So IBM gave us 140 hours of training content across foundation, experienced, and expert consultant, the part of the program. And we analyzed that. Now, when you look at what's on the slide here and the traditional consulting academy, what you're seeing is one component of that. And what was there before was obviously 12 hours, that was it. Everybody went through this 12 hours of digital learning. Whereas now what happens with the Consulting Academy Rethink, a learner if they demonstrate that they can apply the skills and the behaviors correctly, they're out in 3.5, versus learners that actually need to go in and need more interventions. They could be in for 16 hours, which is a good thing. So like, then you go to the next line down and you see that the linear prescribed e-learning, everybody gets the same. However, with this diagnostic simulation approach and adaptive personalization, the learner is getting this rich experience that suits their just for me needs. And that's what learners want. If it's one thing, like going back to something that Andrew said earlier on around COVID, if there's one thing that's really come out of what's happened with COVID and the amount of learning that people have been kind of pushed down, like they want a personalized learning experience. They want to be efficient with their time. So no skill practice in the previous traditional consulting academy, whereas now there's 15% of hours involves skill practice within the simulations. So when we got this 140 hours, we essentially came up with a re-architecture, working with IBM about assigning these diagnostic simulations on the front end in order to do this personalization, where learners come into the diagnostic. If they demonstrate that they can apply the skills, then they go on to the next diagnostic simulation on the next line down. If a learner demonstrates that they can't, they get specific learning inside that learner path. So it brings that personalization to the forefront. So this is a real IBM visceral scenario that is contextualized to the IBM business. And I'm going to play it and then pause it and then play again to give you a sense of what the learner experiences.
So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, we really appreciate you helping us out.
I know you saw the email, so I'd like to take some time today to get an understanding of the steps we'll need to take to fully comprehend Nuvo's issues. For a start, what do you think is the main component that we need to keep in mind across this engagement?
So you can see now the learners looking at the decisions that can be made, and they select a decision and goes forward.
That sounds good to me.
Me too. And based on what we've heard from the account partner, Nuvo's perspective is that they want to improve their service processing speed without sacrificing quality to increase their standing with their customer base.
Right. And Nuvo has engaged IBM specifically to help with this piece.
Based on that, how would you interpret our engagement objective?
That was the best response. Defining the client objective should always be the starting point of any consultative work. What will you say to Sanvi next?
So just to bring something to the forefront here, this is the learner made a decision, made the correct decision. It's reinforced coaching coming in to reinforce that good behavior. Simulations can be designed in lots of different ways. In this case, this aligned to the business objectives and the measures of success that IBM were looking to achieve. And now I'm going to play it on for the next decision. And also the learner, when they make a decision, it impacts the situation, like it impacts the scenario based on their decision.
That's a good start, but I think we should avoid restricting ourselves to just technical specifications.
I agree, Sanvi. We want to keep the objective of our engagement broad enough to leverage IBM's technical expertise as well as our broader industry knowledge,
while making sure that we focus on Nuvo's significant processing delays and unhappy customers.
Exactly. So next, we'll need to do some digging in order to generate some hypotheses, right?
Yes, but just to level set with everyone, what's your perspective on what makes a strong hypothesis?
The team is right. It's too early to be focused strictly on technical solutions. Now, how will you respond to Sanvi's question?
So you can see that there's an example of corrective coaching coming in right there and then where the learner has made a suboptimal decision in the scenario. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay. So the impact of personalization on seat time. So here are the benefits of adaptive personalization. You can see on the green, the light green, the linear learning, the traditional model, and then you can see the personalization model. What we're seeing is an average of about 27% reduction in seat time across the program so far, which is obviously significant. The impact on that as we scale to, as Kelly said earlier on, we're going from 15,000 to 50,000 to 100,000. And the savings in terms of seat time is coming in at 13 million. And I believe, Andrew, you wanted to add a few words to this.
Yeah, I mean, lower seat time equals less opportunity cost, right? Whether that's billable hours or time away from hobbies or family members and friends, because that's kind of the ugly side of learning that we all kind of acknowledge, right? If it's be utilized, be chargeable, then the thing that gives in is my time with my family. Either way, the being able to minimize seat time is hugely important, whether it's personally or whether it's the roll-up impact to the organization. So these are huge, right? But this isn't the only cost savings we have. And I think, Austin, the next slide gets us into some of the other potential cost savings here.
Yeah, this slide goes into the cost effectiveness. When you look at, and this is just on the left-hand side, we're focusing in on 45,000 learners. So before ETU, like IBM's option in terms of going with face-to-face training for the 45,000 learners was coming in at 67 million. For the traditional, the existing, the incumbent that was there solution was 14.6 million. And now with the new academy, the costs are coming in at 9 million. And that's the new academy, the total new academy that Kelly presented earlier on. But I think the real interesting point here is that that's coming in at about $200 a learner for 45,000 learners. But when we scale to 100,000 learners, the cost will remain fixed as we scale. So the cost comes down to the learner cost will come down to $23 a learner. I believe, Kelly, you're going to add a few words here.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think you've said it all pretty well, Austin. I think the financial benefits are really clear to us here. And obviously, once we scale up again and reach our 100,000 within that 30-month period, it's, compared to what we were paying, when you think of the face-to-face and then even the traditional now, that's just a huge cost saving from a learning program perspective. What that does do for us as well, of course, is, this is the track one, which is delivering this effectively, the ability to raise the interest through this type of training. And of course, the way we have restructured our live virtual classroom, which is our part of our track 2, that then enables us to have a look at what we want to do for the track 3 and track 4. And this scaling, this impact basically opens up the space for us to pay more attention and investment there, while still really having change left over from what it would have cost if we had stayed business as usual. So there's just a whole host of benefits here. Well,
and Kelly, to be clear, we could not have scaled it to 100,000 people without doing something like this. There's no way we could have had, the instructor team alone would have blown my entire learning budget for globally to get to there, right? So, and that was the problem. We could never get over kind of a relatively small hump because of the cost of doing it the old way. Kelly, Brenda asked in the chat, what does traditional mean on that left column, that middle thing? What's the definition of traditional there?
Yeah, so traditional is really just our interpretation at the moment of our blended learning program, Brenda. So what that is the learners come in, they do a 3-week blended, they do a 3-week online program where they consume content that we have that everyone has to take. They then go and attend what is now a live virtual classroom for 4 days. So they take 4 days out of their client-facing work, attend this program virtually, and then they go back into the online environment and complete some enhancing learning, you could say. So we just refer to that as traditional. It's not got any adaptive within it, which the new academy does have.
So to just talk a little bit about the data and some of the things that Kelly talked about earlier on of teeing up the data that comes out of the adaptive simulations. So the quantifiable effectiveness of upskilling is evident within the simulations. So on the right-hand side, what you can see is the light green and the dark green bars. The light green is the first attempt by a learner in a simulation. The dark green is their best attempt. So in between the light green and the dark green, learners can go through this iterative process of taking the simulation multiple times. And we're just focusing in on one sim that has, 6 skills, 6 power skills, as Andrew refers to in the simulations. And when you look at 3 of these power skills, you've building trust increases by plus 57%. So we can quantifiably measure that improvement within the sim, that upskilling effect. The other power skills there, understanding the client and nurturing the client, plus 39%, setting and meeting expectations, plus 34%. So tactically, from IBM's perspective, what they can do with this data now is they can look at a sim by sim basis of seeing, like, okay, where inside these particular sims, inside these particular scenarios, these situations, that learners aren't demonstrating their skills correctly. But also the learner, importantly for the learner, for them to see how they actually perform inside the simulation, and also how they progress, how their upskilling is being impacted as they're going through this iterative process of retaking the simulations. So the last slide before I pass over to Kelly again, strategic upskilling at scale with big data for transformation. This is what we do, live and breathe, is around the data that's generated from the simulations. And if we just, it's a nice, very clear 3-dimensional graphic of data that we're looking at here, that in this case, it's 3 skills that we're triangulating. So you have building high-performing teams, you have having difficult conversations, and pervasive communication. And what we're doing here is we're able to visually see the top performing, the mid performing, and the bottom performing data that allows us to provide IBM with the strategic capability of IBM seeing the trends that are within this data, and then identifying what are the strategic investments that IBM needs to deploy resources, both people's time and money, in order to drive further performance into the business, to push people's skills up into that top quadrant across those 3 skills. And then on top of that, we can take, and we have done with our clients, take demographic data or geo data and mix that with this data in order to give further precision insights into where strategic investment is required.
This is an example of the types of comments that we're getting in from our learners as they go through the simulation training. Resoundingly, overall, the feedback is very positive. The learners are loving the interactive nature of the simulations. They're loving the reality that they present them with, the contextual situations that they find themselves in, and they feel, well, what they're saying to us is that and of course what that 95% represents, is that they feel much more confident to then go and apply these skills in the business. So, you know, this is really encouraging to us to see this sort of feedback coming from our learners, particularly at such an early stage of the program. So very high NPS, and of course that 95% saying that they agree that they'll apply what they learned on the jobs. Now, something we have done and will continue to do within the simulations, we obviously don't want to, you know, to survey fatigue our learners, but it is important that we continue to gather data on how the learners are receiving the simulations as they go through them. So at the end of every simulation, we have a very short survey for each simulation that we ask the learner to give their feedback on before they see the results of that simulation. So this is how we're getting this sort of data. That survey, as I said, it's very short. It's one question, one NPS question for the diagnostic, with an optional response to, you know, add a comment. And then for the developmental sims, we have 2 questions in there, one related to the NPS and one related to the ability to apply on the job, along with an optional commentary box. So we're going to continue to collect that data for a little while as we roll the program out across all of our geographies. But yeah, very encouraging response so far. This is some of our top 10 lessons that we have compiled, and I'm not going to read through all of these 10 because, you know, I think some of them are very self-explanatory, but of course happy to take any questions about any one in particular that you're more interested in. Perhaps 1 or 2 that I would call out here, though. You know, this might not be so obvious, but constructive reviewer feedback enables efficient scripting. This is something I would really encourage, if you go down this road, to spend some time almost training your reviewers on how to provide feedback. There are different points during the process where you will require your review team to be involved, of course. Kick-off workshops where you're identifying those skill gaps, those performance gaps, validation sessions where, you know, you're validating the scripting that you have got there. And in between all of that, you've got the actual script which goes out to the review team, and that goes on the ETU software. So your review team, along with, you know, the learning team, that they get to go in and actually comment line by line on the script. Now, the more constructive and specific that feedback can be, that will of course help you down the line, you know, when you're at the end of the day left with all of the commentary, looking to really fine-tune that script and that simulation before it goes to production, regardless of whatever your production is, you know, whether it's an animation or it's a full video, you know, like we have done. So that is, I think that one maybe adds a little bit more clarity to that particular lesson learned. And maybe just the final one I would pull out here, but of course happy to speak to any of them, would be respect the development process. Now, we have built a lot of sims with ETU in a very short period of time. And I don't know if that's a record, Austin, but it's certainly a record for us. And I remember, yeah, and I remember at the very start, I think it might have been yourself, Austin, or one of the team who said, you know, it's 4 months end to end is what it takes. Whether you're designing 1 sim or 10 sims, this is the process. So just by reducing the number of simulations you're going to build, you can't cut corners on that development process. There is a very defined, you know, steps that you need to take from start to end, and each of them take their own specific time. So I think that's just something to be aware about. Yes, we did design a lot of sims within a relatively short period of time for the number we did. But regardless, even if we had you know, just done 1 or 2, you still would have had that time that you had to build into your process.
And just Kelly, just to add in something to what you're saying there, like the simulations that you guys have been building are about 20 minutes in linear path through the sim, and they're pretty much the same with when you look at the diagnostic and the developmental sims. And that build time, as Kelly said, is exactly what it is, like for those that quantum of sims and that size of sims. But obviously, if you're building smaller sims, that does have an impact on the build time in terms of months. like if you're
Yeah.
building in 10 minutes or whatever.
Of course, and the final production as well. I mean, as I say, we went full video, because we really just wanted this to be a really top quality product, particularly for the importance of the power skills that we were addressing. If you were to go with the synthetic characters or that ETU offer, or an animation, image and text, you can cut down some of that production time, of course, but for full video, it's with the type of complexity that we were dealing with, it is what it is, from a timing perspective. Depending on the types of simulations that you're building, you obviously you approach it differently. If you're building a sim that's very, let's say, linked to compliance and regulation that's constantly changing, then our advice would be to build those simulations in a way like what Kelly mentioned earlier, using synthetic media or image and audio. That's the first thing. Obviously, the shoot and having live actors, it has an impact on maintenance. But there's loads of options now out in the market for high quality multimedia, and that can reduce the costs depending on your type of sim you're building. And then Andrew, as you mentioned there, like the whole premise of ETU, in terms of ETU building or IBM building, the whole premise of ETU, it actually stands for empower the user. So our objective is to empower IBM, and IBM have already started onboarding onto the platform, using the platform to build simulations themselves. So IBM can be in full control of making those changes going forward.